In the heart of an unforgiving snowstorm, a lone explorer named Jonas stumbles upon something he never expected. A mysterious figure buried beneath the ice. A woman, frozen and lifeless, yet somehow still clinging to life. As he fights against the storm to save her, secrets beyond his imagination begin to unravel. Who is she? Where did she come from? And what connection does she share with the strange forces hidden within the very planet he's called home? With a storm raging outside, and a planet full of mysteries to uncover, Jonas and his companion must face the unknown, or risk losing everything. Stay tuned to discover how one rescue will change the fate of not just two worlds, but the very fabric of the universe itself. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The wind howled across the barren landscape of Valoria, a frozen wasteland where only the hardiest creatures could survive. Snow whipped through the air, swirling in deadly patterns that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature was far below freezing, and the icy winds bit into the skin with every breath taken. Yet, amidst the endless, white expanse, one figure moved forward, his footsteps steady and sure, cutting through the snow as if he was part of the landscape itself. Jonas Rook was no stranger to this harsh environment. Standing tall at 6'4" with broad shoulders and a rugged, muscular build, he had spent years braving the cold of Valoria's wilderness. His dark brown beard, trimmed neatly despite his isolation, glinted with ice crystals that formed with every gust of wind. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon, constantly searching for danger or signs of life in a world that had little to offer. Beside him, Luna, his cybernetic wolf companion, moved with grace and precision. Her glowing red eyes cut through the snowstorm as she led the way, her keen senses able to detect even the slightest change in the air. Together, they had survived countless expeditions on this unforgiving planet. Jonas trusted Luna completely, knowing she would guide him safely through the treacherous terrain. Jonas adjusted the collar of his thermal coat, pulling it tighter against the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. The storm was getting worse, the wind growing fiercer with each passing minute. He had been out here for hours collecting data for the Valorian Research Initiative, a scientific project designed to study the planet's harsh conditions. But today, the mission had taken an unexpected turn. "Come on, boy," Jonas muttered to Luna, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "Let's get back to the cabin before the storm really hits." Luna, however, did not move. She stopped in her tracks, her head low, ears pinned forward. Jonas knew the look. She had found something. He motioned for her to lead the way, his curiosity piqued. With a low whine, Luna began to move forward again, her paws digging into the snow as she pressed on. Jonas followed closely behind, his instincts telling him something was wrong. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a quiet that didn't belong in a place like Valoria. The storm raged on, but everything around him felt eerily silent. It was as if the snow itself held its breath. Luna's frantic digging soon caught Jonas's attention. The cybernetic wolf was pawing at the snow with increasing urgency, her claws scraping against something solid beneath the surface. Jonas moved, closer, his breath clouding in the cold air as he knelt beside her. "What is it, girl?" he asked. But Luna didn't stop. She continued to dig, her movements more desperate now. Jonas helped, his gloved hands brushing away the snow, revealing something hard beneath. It wasn't ice or rock, but something different. He paused, feeling a strange sense of dread creeping up his spine. What could it be? His fingers struck something soft yet solid, like the texture of skin, not the hardened surface of Valoria's ice. His heart began to race. This was no ordinary discovery. He dug faster, using all his strength to clear away the snow that had buried whatever was beneath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he uncovered the shape of a woman's hand. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. The hand was pale, the skin a delicate shade of blue like frost on glass. His mind raced. Was she alive? He didn't know. But something told him he couldn't leave her here to die. Not like this. Not in this frozen wasteland. He continued to dig, revealing more of her arm, then her shoulder, and finally her face. She was breathtaking, even in the state she was in. Long silver hair spread out around her head like a halo of frozen light. Her features were sharp and striking, her eyes closed as if in eternal sleep. She wore a torn spacesuit, the fabric tattered and covered in layers of ice, a remnant of whatever had brought her here. Jonas's heart pounded in his chest as he checked for a pulse. There was none. The woman was lifeless, frozen in place. But there was something strange about her skin. It wasn't as cold as it should have been after being buried in the snow. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't frozen either. His mind raced as he weighed his options. He couldn't leave her. Not here. Not like this. But the storm was intensifying, and Jonas knew he had to make a quick decision. He couldn't carry her back to his cabin without risking both their lives. But he couldn't just leave her to die either. Jonas made up his mind. He gathered her fragile body into his arms, lifting her with surprising ease. She was lighter than he expected, almost delicate, like she had been weightless in the snow. Luna pressed close to his side, her protective instincts kicking in as they began their slow trek back through the growing storm. Every step was a struggle. The wind pushed against him, making it feel as though the very earth was fighting against his progress. Jonas's fingers were numb from the cold, his muscles aching from the effort of carrying the woman through the snow. Luna stayed by his side, her glowing eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to any threats. By the time Jonas reached his cabin, he was barely able to feel his hands. The door to the small, isolated structure opened with a grunt as he shoved it open, grateful for the rush of warm air that greeted him. The storm howled outside, but inside it was a different world, one of warmth and shelter. He laid the woman gently on his bed, her cold form contrasting against the warmth of the room. Jonas stood over her, uncertain of what to do next. He couldn't explain why, but something about her presence, her pale skin and strange beauty tugged at his heart. Luna curled up by the door, watching with unblinking eyes as Jonas began to strip away the woman's frozen outer garments. He worked quickly, wrapping her in thermal blankets, doing everything he could to warm her body without causing further harm. He even removed his own outer layers, stripping down to his base clothing, and lay beside her, hoping that his body heat would be enough to revive her. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, Jonas clung to a fragile hope. He didn't know who this woman was or how she had ended up here, but he couldn't help but feel that his actions had already changed the course of both their lives. Luna watched quietly, her tail wagging slowly as if she too understood the gravity of the situation. As Jonas lay beside her, the warmth from his body slowly began to spread to her frozen form. He whispered a soft promise to her, though he wasn't sure if she could hear. "Stay with me." For the first time since finding her, Jonas allowed himself to close his eyes, hoping that the storm outside was the only thing he'd have to face. Jonas sat by the bed, his breath steady but his mind racing. He had always believed that his life on Valoria, isolated and routine as it was, had a certain quiet simplicity. But today everything had changed. The woman, the strange coldness of her body, the inexplicable pulse he had felt beneath her skin, none of it made sense. Yet here she was, lying in his cabin, as if she had appeared from the very heart of the storm. The wind continued to howl outside, an unrelenting reminder of the harsh world they inhabited. Inside, though, the air was warm, and the crackling fire in the corner provided a comforting backdrop to the strange scene unfolding before Jonas. He had spent years learning how to survive in this world, how to endure the isolation, how to brave the storms, but never had he imagined something like this. Luna, ever watchful, lay near the door, her glowing eyes tracking every movement. The dog had never shown any sign of fear, but Jonas could see that she too recognized the gravity of the situation. There was something about this woman, something beyond the obvious fact that she had been buried in the snow, her life hanging in the balance. Jonas shifted his position, adjusting the thermal blanket around the woman's fragile form, she was still unconscious. Her skin warmer than before, but still far from normal. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something, waiting for her to wake up and explain everything, to give him some answers to the overwhelming questions swirling in his mind. His hands hovered over her, uncertain, but the need to help her, to ensure her survival, outweighed any doubts he had. He couldn't bring himself to leave her alone. The isolation of this cabin, the brutal cold outside, it was all too much for one person to face alone. But now, with this stranger in his home, he couldn't help but wonder how much his life would change in the coming days. Jonas glanced at Luna, who had moved closer to the bed, her head cocked slightly as if listening for something. She stood, her tail stiff, and then padded silently to the door. Jonas, feeling the weight of the moment, stood up to follow her, needing a moment of fresh air to clear his head. As he opened the door, the icy wind hit him like a slap, but it was a welcome rush of reality. He stepped outside, breathing deeply as the storm whipped around him. The snowstorm had intensified, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. The thought of leaving the cabin to face the storm again crossed his mind briefly, but he quickly dismissed it. No, tonight was different. He would stay, at least for now. For her. Back inside, the woman had begun to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her eyes, the color of deep space, shimmered with a strange intensity as she tried to sit up. Jonas hurried to her side, carefully helping her to a sitting position. Her movement was slow, almost deliberate, as though she had to summon every ounce of energy just to function. "Easy," Jonas murmured softly, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now. Just take it slow." Her gaze locked onto him, confusion evident in those starry eyes. She didn't speak immediately, only looked around the room, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. It was then that she seemed to remember, her expression shifting as fragments of her past came rushing back to her. "I remember," she whispered, her voice thin, fragile. "The storm. The cold. I couldn't make it stop." Her words trailed off, as if the memories were too much for her to bear. Jonas noticed the faint tremor in her hands, her struggle to stay conscious. "Don't try to move too much," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "You're safe here. My name is Jonas. This is my cabin." She blinked, then offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Her lips parted, and he heard the soft rasp of her breath before she spoke again, her words hesitant but clearer now. Amara Valen." Her voice was still weak, but there was a quiet strength in it that Jonas couldn't ignore. I'm not from here. I was stranded. My ship, it crashed." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window where the snowstorm continued to rage outside. "I was trying to make it back, but I got lost." Jonas felt a pang of sympathy for her. This woman had been out in the storm alone with no one to help. She had nearly perished in the unforgiving cold, and now here she was, speaking to him like a stranger. But somehow, their connection felt familiar, as though fate had brought them together in this desolate place. "I don't understand," Jonas admitted softly, his voice quiet but sincere. "I found you buried under the snow, Amara. You were cold, lifeless." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But you're still here. How is that possible?" Amara's expression softened as she looked back at him. Her lips twitched, a weak smile appearing as she took a deep, steadying breath. "I'm not sure," she said quietly. I think something about the storm, something about the cold. It froze me, but it didn't kill me." She shook, her head as if to clear away the confusion. "I don't know how I'm still here. I've never experienced anything like this." Jonas nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. There were so many unanswered questions. How had she survived the snow? Why had her body reacted the way it did? And most importantly, what was she doing here? He had no answers, only more questions. But for now, he couldn't focus on the hows or the whys. Rest, Jonas urged, gently guiding her back down onto the bed. You need to recover. We can figure everything else out later. But as he watched her settle back onto the blankets, his mind was filled with more doubts than ever. She had said she wasn't from here. She was stranded, lost, far from her home. And yet something about her presence, her words, and the way her skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the cabin made him wonder if there was more to this woman than met the eye. Amara's body lay still for a moment. But then, her voice, faint but full of curiosity, broke the silence. I don't know why you saved me, Jonas, she whispered, her eyes meeting his. But I can't help but feel like you were meant to. Jonas felt a strange shiver run through him. He had no idea why he had saved her. But in that moment, with the storm howling outside and the faint warmth of her body slowly filling the room, he realized that perhaps, in a world as cold and unforgiving as Valoria, it was the simplest acts of kindness that were the most powerful. The days passed slowly inside Jonas's cabin, each one a mix of cold winds outside and the warm, flickering glow of the fire within. Despite the isolation that Valoria often demanded of him, Jonas had never truly felt loneliness. He had Luna, his loyal companion, and the land was vast and empty, but there was a certain peace in the solitude. Yet now, with Amara in his cabin, the stillness of his world had changed. The woman from another world, her presence, mysterious and captivating, seemed to pull him into a new chapter of his life. Each morning Jonas would wake early to tend to the fire, start his hydroponic systems, and check the storm outside. Luna, as always, stood at the door, eyes trained on Amara's bed. Amara, still weak from her near-death experience in the snow, would spend her days in the cabin, mostly resting. But every day her strength grew a little more, and with it, so did her curiosity. She had so many questions about Jonas, about Valoria, and about the strange ways her body was adapting to the cold, and in return, Jonas found himself equally fascinated by her. Their days were filled with quiet conversation, the low hum of the cabin's heat systems, and the occasional howl of the wind outside. Jonas found himself sharing more of his past than he ever had with anyone. He told Amara about his life before he came to Valoria, how he had been part of a small group of explorers, charting the galaxy, seeking out new worlds. But something had changed when Valoria had drawn him in. It was as if the planet had called to him, beckoning him to stay. He had been alone for years since the others left. Now, in this strange twist of fate, he wasn't alone anymore. Amara, on the other hand, had her own stories to tell. She had been an explorer from the distant planet Nyaros, part of a team sent to investigate the planet's unique resources. But something had gone wrong. Her ship had crashed, and she had been separated from the others. Her survival, she explained, had been aided by the same biological processes that allowed her species to endure the harshest climates. She told Jonas of her people, the Nira, whose survival instincts were beyond anything he had ever heard. They could endure freezing cold, navigate the deepest of caves, and even survive in toxic environments. But her story wasn't just one of survival. It was also about the evolution of her species and their ability to adapt quickly to changing environments. She had described the etheric energy that ran through her people, a unique energy source that could change the very makeup of their bodies. She spoke of how their bodies could harness the elements and communicate telepathically with nature, plants, animals, and even the weather itself. Jonas had never encountered a species like hers before. Amara's revelations left him awestruck, and for the first time in years he felt a spark of excitement, of curiosity about the universe beyond Valoria's icy boundaries. There was so much he didn't know, so much he hadn't even imagined. One evening, after Amara had regained more of her strength, Jonas decided to take a walk outside. It had been a while since he had ventured into the wilderness, and the wind had finally calmed. The icy stillness of the world seemed inviting in a way, and he needed some time to think. He invited Amara to join him, knowing that being outside might help her recovery. Together they ventured out into the snow. Luna trotted beside them, her tail wagging with the familiar excitement of a new adventure. The landscape was breathtaking, a blanket of white, the snow glimmering under the light of the twin moons above. The world seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of snow and ice, yet Jonas felt a new energy between them, something both foreign and familiar at the same time. As they walked, Amara spoke more about her home world. She described the endless barren stretches of Nyaros, where survival was both a challenge and a way of life. Her people, the Nira, lived in high-altitude cities that seemed to float on the clouds. Their culture was ancient, steeped in wisdom and technology that Jonas could scarcely comprehend. But there was one thing that stood out to him, a sense of unity, of belonging, that had been absent from his own life for so long. "We are not individuals in the way you might think," Amara said, her voice soft, the words catching in the biting wind. "On Nyaros, everything is connected. The land, the sky, the stars, everything shares the same pulse. We are part of it, as it is part of us." Jonas nodded slowly, absorbing her words. It was difficult for him to imagine what such a connection must feel like. His life on Valoria, though peaceful in many ways, had been one of isolation. Even though he had spent years learning to read the land, to listen to its silent rhythms, it was nothing like the bond Amara spoke of. Still, he couldn't deny the pull of her words. The silence between them grew, but it was comfortable. Jonas found himself looking at Amara more than he had before. Her silver hair shimmered in the dim light of the moons, her features softening with each passing day as she regained her strength. There was an elegance in the way she moved, an unspoken grace that seemed to come from her deep connection to the land she had once known. As they walked, Luna suddenly stopped, her ears twitching. She looked up, her eyes scanning the horizon. Jonas instinctively halted, his hand resting on the handle of his pulse rifle at his side. Something didn't feel right. The air felt colder, more charged, and he could sense that Luna had picked up on something he hadn't yet noticed. Amara also sensed the shift. She turned to Jonas, her expression focused. "Do you feel that?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with an intensity he hadn't heard before. Jonas nodded, his hand tightening around his weapon. "Something's out there." Before he could react, Luna gave a sharp bark and dashed ahead, disappearing into the snow. Jonas and Amara followed quickly, their steps heavy in the deep snow. Luna's barking echoed in the distance, a series of short, sharp sounds that grew louder with each passing second. Jonas's heart raced as they neared the sound. His instincts screamed that they were no longer alone on Valoria. Someone was watching them. As they rounded a snow-covered hill, Luna's form emerged from behind a rocky outcrop. She was standing over something, her tail stiff and alert. Jonas reached for his rifle, but his gaze softened when he saw what Luna was guarding. There, lying in the snow, was a strange, humanoid figure. A being covered in fur and ice, its body glistening under the pale moonlight. Its chest rose and fell in slow, labored breaths, and it seemed to be alive but barely holding on. Amara stepped forward cautiously, her eyes narrowing. "Another survivor," she whispered, as if to herself. Jonas's gaze met hers, his mind racing. He had no idea who or what this being was, but one thing was certain. Valoria had secrets, and those secrets were far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Jonas stood still, his gaze fixed on the creature in the snow. It wasn't the first time he had encountered something strange on Valoria, but this was different. The being before him looked far from human, yet not entirely alien either. Its body was covered in thick white fur, matted with ice that had frozen as the storm raged on. The creature's chest rose and fell in slow, laborious breaths, and though it had the features of a mammal, there was something undeniably otherworldly about it. Its eyes, pale and glazed with frost, flickered open briefly, revealing a deep, unsettling blackness, and then closed again, as if too weak to stay conscious. Luna stood over it, her posture alert, but non-threatening. The cybernetic wolf's gaze flicked between Jonas and Amara, silently urging them to approach with caution. "What is this?" Jonas muttered under his breath, crouching beside the creature. He could feel a strange vibration in the air around them. Something faint but intense, almost like static electricity. It was as if the world itself was reacting to the creature's presence. The storm, too, seemed to shift, the winds no longer howling but now merely whispering. Amara stepped closer, her expression guarded yet intrigued. She knelt beside Jonas, her sharp eyes scanning the creature carefully. "It's not from here," she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the stillness of the moment. "It's not a native of Valoria. It feels alien, but not in the way we usually define it." Jonas felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "What do you mean?" "This planet, Valoria, is a melting pot of sorts," Amara continued. "It's been a point of contact for many species for centuries, a place where those who've lost their way find refuge. But this creature doesn't belong to any of the known species I've studied. It's something else entirely." Jonas frowned, his heart pounding in his chest. "Do you think it was left here, stranded like you?" "I can't say," Amara replied, her eyes narrowing as she studied the creature. "But it's no coincidence. Something or someone sent it here. I can feel the pull of it. This being is connected to something bigger, something beyond Valoria." Jonas watched her for a long moment, unsure what to make of her words. He had never believed in the supernatural, but the way Amara spoke, the way she was almost attuned to the planet, gave him pause. Perhaps there was more to this strange world than he had ever thought. Amara glanced up at Jonas, her violet eyes meeting his with a look of quiet resolve. "We can't leave it here. It needs help, just like I did. If it's alive, it's a survivor. And survivors have a way of showing us the next step." Jonas took a deep breath, then nodded. The storm had already been relentless, but now, with the creature before him and the strange, unexplainable connection Amara seemed to have with Valoria, he realized that this world was not as barren and lifeless as he had once thought. There were forces here, hidden ones, that had yet to reveal themselves. "All right," Jonas said, standing up. "Let's get it back to the cabin. If it's going to make it, it's going to need warmth." Together they gently lifted the creature, Amara handling it with an unexpected tenderness despite its imposing form. Jonas led the way back to the cabin, his thoughts racing. What could this creature be? What role did it play in the unfolding mystery of Valoria? And more importantly, how was it connected to Amara? As they trudged through the snow, the wind dying down as they neared the shelter of the cabin, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of discovering something extraordinary. The storm outside may have waned, but inside, the air was charged with anticipation. Once inside, Jonas helped settle the creature onto a bed of thermal blankets, just as he had done for Amara. He set up the heating system in the cabin to warm it gradually, careful not to shock the creature's system. Amara knelt beside it, her fingers brushing against its fur, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jonas watched her silently. He had always been a practical man. He focused on survival, on getting through the day. But Amara was different. She seemed to feel things as though she could sense the essence of the planet itself. And now, as she knelt beside the creature, it was clear that she felt a deeper connection to it than just the need to survive. "What are you thinking?" Jonas asked softly, breaking the silence. Amara didn't look up immediately, her focus on the creature. "This being," she murmured, her voice low and almost reverent. "It's connected to the etheric network." "The what?" "The etheric network," Amara repeated. "It's a form of energy that binds all life in the galaxy. It's older than the stars themselves. It's a hidden current that runs through everything, every living being, every world. Some are aware of it, and some are not. But those who are, they can feel it. And this creature," she said, pausing as if choosing her words carefully, "is tied to it. In a way, it's a key. It's here for a reason." Jonas wasn't sure what to make of her words, but the intensity in her voice made him pause. He had heard of strange phenomena on distant planets, of energy sources that could alter the fabric of space and time. But Amara's belief in the etheric network seemed to be more than just a theory. It was something she could feel. "How do you know all this?" Jonas asked, his curiosity piqued. "You've been studying it?" Amara nodded, her gaze lifting, to meet his. "Yes, I've spent years studying energy signatures across galaxies. I've been trained to sense the connections between species, planets, and the universe itself. But until I came here, I never felt anything like this. It's different. There's something about Valoria. It's a focal point, and now, with this creature here, it feels like the pieces are finally aligning." Jonas turned to look at the creature once more. It was still breathing steadily, its fur shimmering faintly as the warmth of the cabin began to seep into its body. He didn't know what to think. The more he heard from Amara, the more the world around him seemed to shift, like he had been living on the edge of a vast unknown for so long, and now the truth was beginning to unravel before him. "I don't know what's going to happen," Jonas admitted, his voice steady. "But I think you're right. We can't ignore this." Amara smiled faintly, the faintest hint of relief crossing her features. "No, we can't." That night, as Jonas and Amara sat in front of the fire, Luna curled up at their feet. They discussed what they had learned. The creature lay in the corner of the room, still recovering, its body slowly adapting to the warmth. But for the first time in Jonas's life, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something monumental. A bridge between worlds had been built. A bridge made of strange beings, cosmic energy, and the unknown. And as the night wore on, Jonas found himself more willing to step forward, to embrace the mystery that had suddenly entered his life. The future was no longer a place of predictable survival. It was a place filled with limitless possibilities waiting to unfold.